improve our service to the community with a focus on many things, including public safety and policing. And we're asking for your help in providing feedback and suggestions for the use of force policy, which is in the process of being revised and ultimately will reflect our commitment to the 10 shared principles. So when you consider use of force, it's important to think about it in context. Last year, we had about 27,000 calls for police service in our community, and use of force was involved in about 110 of those calls. So it's about 0.4% of the total calls for service, total interactions we have with the community. But while it's a very small percentage, it can have very big impact on the members of the public, the police officers, families, etc. And that's why we're taking a very close look at our use of force policy. So we thank you for joining us tonight, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say and your comments, and we'll be recording that. Thank you.
So like the mayor just said, I also would like to thank you for attending tonight. There are places and things that you might be doing other than this, but you chose to be here and participate, so thank you. As the mayor said, there are 27,000 plus contacts we had in 2019. 112 of those resulted in a use of force. And while these events are low frequency, they're high stakes, and they have a big impact, not just on the citizens, but for the officer as well. I spent over a decade in investigations, and one of the duties that I had while there was being a part of our multi-jurisdictional team here in Champaign County. And I got to be a part of many investigations regarding officers' serious uses of force. And these events are stressful, and they're very real for everyone involved. And I want to make sure that, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's the citizen that's experienced the trauma, the witnesses who see it, the officers who have gone through it. So I hope today is beneficial as we move forward towards reworking our use of force and policy, and thank you for attending.
Good evening, and thank you both to Mayor Marlin and to Chief Seraphin. To all of our attendees and our panelists, hello, my name is Lamont Peppers. Excuse me. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for the City of Urbana. I will be serving as today's moderator, facilitator of this discussion. We have heard from both Mayor Marlin and our very own Chief Seraphin, so now we have just a few housekeeping rules before we open up the public forum discussion platform. We here at the City of Urbana openly acknowledge some of the events that have been unfortunate that have brought us here on today. We also recognize the sensitivity to some people of these past events across the emotional spectrum. Having said that, this venue is to create an open dialogue to receive your thoughts and ideas regarding the most equitable practices when it comes to the police department's use of force policy. In clarifying what this particular venue is, let us be mindful and clear of what it is not. This is not the arena for personal attacks against named individuals, a time to filibuster and or monopolize the conversation or time constraints. And maybe most importantly, that this is not a time to throw out verbal decorum and acceptable language. Hence, profanity, racially charged words or phrases, language that is offensive in nature as it relates to race, gender, sexual orientation, appropriate pronoun usage, and or slanderous attacks on municipal staff within the City of Urbana, Illinois will not be tolerated. We are not asking, nor do we come with the expectations that this topic of conversation will not be emotionally charged. However, violations of the aforementioned guidelines will result in muted microphones and interjected conversation by myself, at which time those individuals will not be permitted to rejoin the forum, but will be asked to submit the remainder of their commentary using the email address provided on the website, useofforcepolicy@urbanaillinois.us. This is a time for us, the city staff and leadership, to listen to you. We have one of our planning division staff members, Lily Wilcock, here to serve as our scribe. If you say something that I don't understand, or that Lily doesn't understand, we will ask you for further clarification to make sure we are capturing your ideas accurately. We are scribing this so you can know what we hear you saying. We are also recording this session. As we go along, I may ask you follow-up questions as well, or I may ask you to send us follow-up by email. In order to make time for everyone, we are going to start with 5-minute rounds. If we get through everyone who would like to speak through the first round, then we will do another set of 5-minute rounds. Please use the raise your hand function if you would like to speak. You can find that function on your participant button. If you click that, then you'll see a raise hand icon, which will notify us that you would wish to speak and share at this time. Please note that the chat function will not be enabled, but if you would like to submit things in writing, you can do so using our dedicated email address. That email again is useofforcepolicy@urbanaillinois.us. The video function will be enabled if you would like to show your video while speaking, and certainly we would love to be able to see and engage closer and connect better with you. So at this time, we open up the forum and we want to know who has something that they would like to share. I see we have a hand raised.
Yeah, this is Christopher Hansen. I'm going to promote Christopher to a panelist here, so he'll be able to turn on his video should he choose. And then once he's situated, he can unmute himself, and his time will begin.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Oh, can you hear me?
Hello, Mr. Hansen. Good evening.
Hey, sorry, I've never used the video on my phone. Let's see here. Well, maybe you won't get to see me today. I'll just speak. My name is Christopher Hansen. I've lived in Urbana for 18 years. I'm a little bothered at first about how these listening sessions kind of became situated. They weren't put on the city calendar until I think maybe yesterday when I sent something over to Jared Miller and Mary Alice Wu. And then I'm also trying to understand, this was discussed at city council meetings. Why is the use of force policies only making reference to the 8-page, I think it's policy 300? That seems more or less a preface to, there's a number of policy chapters that actually talk about use of force. So you're looking at use of force, or the policy 300, but there's 301, which is use of force review boards, 302, handcuffing and restraints, 303, control devices and techniques, 304, tasers, 305, serious use of force and in custody deaths, 306, firearms, 308, vehicle pursuits, 314, temporary custody of juveniles, etc. So I guess I'm just a little confused why it was represented that the use of force policy was just in this policy 300 thing, which has very little in it actually. I'm also a little bothered. It seems to me that the Urbana Police Department has replaced a number of policies right before these listening sessions, so just over the past month. And I'm wondering why you didn't wait for public input first before you replaced them. And I guess you went ahead and just bought new policies from Lexipol, but it seems like maybe the public should have been giving input first. I guess I'd be curious if anyone's willing to answer what our relationship is with Lexipol and how much we pay for these policies and how that works. And then also Chief Serafin, well, he did talk about that they were going through redacting the policies, and Councilmember Jared Miller asked during a meeting that we would be able to see the old versions or what was changed before they changed it. And I'm still not aware of the public having any ability to see those versions. So we're kind of really coming in blind here, and it feels a little disingenuous in a way. I also want to comment on kind of the way this listening session was introduced. Mr. Peppers gave kind of some rules for speaking, and that just, I mean, it doesn't intimidate me, but I think I listened to the youth listening session and you didn't have anyone speak. And I think anyone listening to that would be very intimidated to speak. And so I think that, I don't know why you'd want to shut down free speech at something like this when you're trying to get people to talk. And so I also wonder why you don't let people use the Zoom chat feature. If there are people who are a little afraid of speaking through audio, I think, letting them type in the chat would be the best way to let them contribute. Anyway, all these things combined, kind of has this, has this listening session has much more the appearance of a kind of a public relations stunt than an actual, effort to gather community feedback. It just seems poorly set up. On to some issues of content. So Chief Serafin said there were 112 use of force incidents in 2019. I don't know any member of the public who believes that number. Maybe the chief can talk about how they count that and make sure that use of force is actually reported by the officers. I'm aware of incidents that force was used and it was never counted as a use of force event. And then also I was wondering about the 10 shared principles, which was kind of posted under this listening session too. And I'm wondering about transparency and public records and the Freedom of Information Act. So for example, I tried to send a FOIA request for the Urbana police policies, and the Urbana Police Department violated the FOIA law. And I'm not just speculating. I have a letter from the Attorney General saying they did. And I was never able to get those policies, and now they've been changed, and apparently I can't get the old ones. Maybe they've been destroyed. And I'm just wondering, are we actually going to follow the 10 shared principles about transparency and stuff and FOIA? And now we're having all these Open Meetings Act violations during, city council meetings, and it's mostly in regards to people who are trying to speak about police issues. And so that doesn't feel like transparency either, or public access. And Open Meetings Act violations, those are actual crimes. I mean, those are things that our police officers can be taking action on. So I'm not sure why we're letting that go by. So I don't know. And then the last thing, I guess, I want to talk about accountability or ask about that. I guess I'm wondering, I think the public probably has the viewpoint from everyone I've spoken to. I think actually most of the public feel like whatever rules or policies are going to be set up are not actually going to be enforced, because it's the feeling of many, many people, if not most, that police officers get to break the rules and are not held accountable. So I'm wondering, why should we bother? I don't have any faith that if the rules are changed, it's going to matter, because we don't have a system of accountability set up to actually enforce the rules. And we've had many attempts recently to kind of subvert our civilian police review board, and we just keep doing, playing this silly game. So maybe someone here in the panel can try to convince us that the rules will actually be enforced, and how you're going to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments and your attendance tonight, Mr. Hansen. Much was shared there. Chief Serafin, I wonder if you might be able to address or weigh in. There was some questions surrounding, I believe it was, am I hearing it correctly, Lexapro, or maybe what involvement or participation they have with the use of force policies, not to negate any commentary that was shared by Mr. Hansen, but for the sake of the time that we have tonight, we want to try to structure and keep as much of our conversation, question and answer based around the use of force policy issues. I know much was shared in the commentary, and certainly we appreciate that. But if I missed anything else, I know there was something in regards to the 10 shared principles, which I was privileged to attend. So I don't know if maybe you could take a moment to talk and respond to maybe the Lexapro issue, if I heard correctly, and then the 10 shared principles.
So let me take a stab at there. As you said, there was a lot of material presented there. First, with regards to the policies, the department will come across different policies that we want to review. As a baseline, Lexapol, it's actually Lexipol, Lincoln. Lexapol is a service that provides policies, baseline policies for, and they have this set up in a variety of different states. And that it's sort of a starting point, if you will. And then the department may tweak things or try to make sure that they match how we operate individually. Before several months ago, as a matter of fact, we had started looking at some of those. We actually instituted all of the Lexapol policies after doing an initial retrofit, if you will, to the Lexapol product about 5 years ago. So some of the policies had been changed, some hadn't. Some things you don't change very often, for instance, uniform policies. Other policies you might change more frequently. Lexapol will send out different updates and say, hey, we believe this has changed in the law. This is something you need to look at. And that's one of the benefits of that, is you have their staff trying to make sure that people are continuing to use some of those best practices. So I don't know off the top of my head the subscription fee for Lexapol. It's a few $1,000s a year. But I think that might be the best I can do tonight without getting a little research done. With regards to the other, I guess the other piece of this that we'll pick up on with regards to the 10 shared principles and transparency. When the officers, and since we're talking about use of force, when officers use force, they have to indicate so on their report. The sergeant has to check that as well. And then it goes to a committee of in-house people who have been a part of whether investigating or investigators, detectives, who have maybe some expertise in this area with regards to defensive tactics instructors. And those, that team reviews all the uses of force. In addition to that, when the reports are read, detectives read all the reports, they too will sort of try to make sure that these are getting in the right review pile. So there's a process in place to flag these and then to review them. And one of the new things that we've added more recently here in the last few months is the idea of incorporating the body cam video, which we've had for about 1.5 years, or I guess it'll be 2 years coming up here in January. That's something that we hadn't done a good job of incorporating. So now we've changed that process to make sure that we're getting those videos and reviewing that. So I guess I'll maybe leave it at that so I don't take up all the time tonight, Lamont. So hopefully there's a couple of things that we can hit on.
No, thank you so much. And thank you for walking us through kind of that identification and documentation and step process. And certainly, and we've got some people who are ready to speak. Before we move too far ahead, we want to share that not leveraging one side over the other, but we want to make it clear that when it comes to the use of force, it is a traumatizing event. There's trauma experienced by both the officer as well as the person with whom the force is impacted on. And part of what we are trying to unpack and do here is to hear from you all, the community, as far as things that you would like to see, things that you're unclear about, questions you may have surrounding this use of force policy. So, once again, and you may hear this several times from me tonight, certainly on behalf of the city, we just appreciate everyone tuning in, taking time out of their evening to share with us, that we can take this information in and incorporate it as we move forward. Jason, I believe we have some others with a hand raised. We're ready to proceed. Thank you.
Yeah, I am promoting Scott Dossett as a panelist now. Once Scott joins us, he can turn on his video should he choose to, and then unmute himself and address us.
Thank you.
Hello, am I on?
Good morning. Good morning. Excuse me. Good evening, Mr. Dossett. How are you? Yes, we can hear you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for all you do for us, everyone. Read through the use of force stuff, including some of the auxiliary documents Mr. Hansen noted. And just a couple of comments. I really hope that in the rewrite of the use of force policy, or at least in a real quick, easy addendum, we can come up with some formal de-escalation sections. One of the best ideas I've heard come out of one of our CPRB meetings was actually by my friend and council person, Dennis Roberts. The pyramid always goes up, and we talk about de-escalation, but I think as a way to help citizens understand difficult decisions and the process of an interaction, it would be useful to have a de-escalation pyramid. I almost see this thing as ending up as a trapezoid on a piece of paper, as opposed, to the triangle going up. Have read a little bit, particularly interested in the use of force review committee. It's my strong opinion that in an effort to get real transparency and to increase extra police involvement, that you should consider that committee having a civilian member, somebody from the community, to serve on your use of force review committee, because currently it's pretty much locked up, with representatives of the police and union and that kind of thing. I also think You know, Lamond mentioned police and perpetrator trauma, let's say. I also think there's a real issue of community trauma here. This all goes back to the Aaliyah Lewis situation, at least very much of it does. After many hours spent reviewing that document, sent the mayor and the chief some significant concerns I had about sort of like the internal and external communication problems that I noted in that instance. And I don't know whether that could be formally introduced into a new use of force policy, or whether that would even be a wise thing. But all of us who've watched that video repeatedly in some cases are really struck by the fact that the two officers responding are both yelling. They're not communicating. The situation of the male who was found with the gun in the end would have almost been comic in his response, except for the potential lethality of that event. And so I think the department really needs to do some searching, think about use of technology and use of that communications as they're in this, because that was the closest thing to you know, a bomb waiting to go off that thankfully didn't, that I can think of. In terms of the larger issues of how we move forward with this use of force rewrite, and you know, there are changes about CPRB mentioned. I studied a lot. I was in actually a 4-hour webinar today with the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. And it's going to be impossible for us to have a big city set with the resources that we have. If you look at departments like Chicago and LAPD and Washington, man, there's just so much involvement and in and out. Urbana is never going to be able to afford that, I don't think, but ways still need to be found to increase transparency, to increase extra police involvement in internal auditing functions within UPD. Just how that happens, I'm not sure, but, and I'm probably riding a little bit of a high from this webinar, but it's really exciting how you can take, you know, the counting of incidents and how things unfolded and move that into an audit function and really, I think, gain a lot of understanding to the community that you're trying to interact with. So anyway, those are just a couple of things that I wanted to bring up today, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing, Mr. Dossett. We appreciate your commentary. Jason, can we bring on the next participant?
Yeah, the next participant is Deborah Liu. I am going to promote Deborah to a panelist. Then she can choose to turn on her video if she wants, and then she'll also need to unmute, and she can begin addressing.
Thank you.
Hey folks, can you hear me?
Good evening, Ms. Liu. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing pretty well. Could I have the timer, please? Just so I know, well, whatever. I'll just start talking. So I have a couple of things that I want to say. So the first thing is I'm a little concerned that the use of force policy, it doesn't seem to address the issue of talking to individuals that are obviously suffering from mental illness. As I'm sure Chief Serafin and folks on the board, I'm sure you're aware, nationally, 21% of police calls are to mental health situations. And very tragically, I think a couple of weeks ago in Philadelphia, the police were called to an event that involved a mentally ill man. They perceived his schizophrenia, his behavior stemming from his schizophrenia, as threatening to them, and they ended up shooting him, which is obviously unacceptable from any level, right? Mentally ill people are some of the most vulnerable people in our community. And, I think it's a whole separate can of worms that police are called to these sorts of situations. But I really think the policy needs to be explicit about when officers are called to issues that involve a mentally ill subject, that there be explicit guidelines for how the police can handle that. Right, because as written, it basically just says if the officer called to the scene perceives there to be a danger, they basically can act as they see fit, which it just doesn't seem it's not specific enough for me. As long as we're on the language, this policy uses a lot of phrases like where feasible, when possible, when the officer reasonably believes. These are all just legal equivocation. These things need to be well defined. As you point out, when use of force is employed, it's traumatizing for everyone. It's traumatizing for the subject, it's traumatizing for the officers involved, it's traumatizing for any witnesses. So I think for the sake of for both the community and for the officers involved, it needs to be explicitly spelled out when these things are permitted. As it is, it leaves a lot up to the officer, and also it leaves a lot of legal loopholes. Quite frankly, I feel like the policy as written allows the department to cover its ass. When something happens, you can just say, well, the officer believed that there was imminent threat. Like, how is imminent threat defined? Like, what was this checklist of 5 things listed, right? So for everyone, I think these things need to be very explicit. Chief Seraphin, I believe you mentioned that the department used there were 112 instances of use of force last year. So I'm a little bit with Mr. Hansen here. I don't really believe that number. I'd like to, how is use of force defined, right? And on sort of another note, I think that every time a weapon is displayed, I think it needs to be, this needs to be recorded as a use of force. It's verbal and emotional intimidation for an officer who's obviously in a position of power over a subject when they're called to a scene. Like there needs to be documentation. And I know that the use of force policy says that a report needs to be written. I'd be interested to know if the display of a weapon in and of itself is counted as a use of force policy, or is counted as a use of force. And I think if it's not, it does need to be recorded somewhere. Gosh, so okay, hang on, there's a lot of things here. So in 2019, this is just from a web search I made, the Urbana Police Department arrested 252 minors. Youth of color, this is a well-documented psychological fact. Youth of color are often perceived to be older, more mature, more threatening than youth of non-color, right? And I'd like to see the policy address this. If a police officer is called to a scene and they see someone that they perceive to be, for whatever reason, they're going to perceive a youth of color as more threatening than someone who's not. So I would like the policy to address this, even to acknowledge it, so the officers are trained in this. Chief Seraphin mentioned body cam video as something that the Urbana Police Department has been doing. There have been many instances nationally where there was something that happened that was clearly unacceptable. Somebody ended up dying that should have died. Someone was seriously injured. And the answer from the police department was that, oh, the body cam wasn't on. I think failure to turn on the body cam needs to be a fireable offense, no questions asked. The police has lost the public trust, both nationally and in our local community. And to rebuild that trust, there needs to be full accountability. And so for that reason, I think that if there are any instances where there is no body cam video because the officer, quote unquote, forgot to turn it on, it needs to be an immediately fireable offense. The last thing, right, so with Mr. Dossett here, I was very disturbed by the video of the arrest of Ms. Lewis. One thing that strikes me particularly as somebody who has worked with firearms in the past, the safety was off, right? Like the first rule of firearm safety that you teach children, right? You never point a firearm at someone unless you're prepared to shoot it, right? And the officer involved obviously didn't follow that protocol, that his firearm was swinging everywhere in all directions. You could have discharged at any point, and you always assume the firearm is live, right? Like it's grossly irresponsible to me, the way the firearm was handled in that situation. And I do think the use of force policy needs to address that. If the safety comes off, there needs to be a special report written and it needs to be recorded. All right, I'm out of time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Liu, for participating and sharing in your commentary. Jason, who do we have next?
Next is Tracy Chong. I'm going to promote Tracy to a panelist. Once Tracy joins, she can choose to turn on her video if she wishes and unmute herself and begin addressing the council. Or excuse me, I'm used to council meetings. Begin addressing the listening session here.
Hi. Yeah, I'll just use audio tonight. Can
Good
you hear
evening,
me?
Ms. Chong. Yes, good evening, Ms. Chong. Go right ahead.
Good evening. I'm Tracy Chong, resident of Urbana. So what I want to say is that the public has been telling you what we want for months. So I don't understand why this needs to be a drawn out PR process. So I'm going to keep tonight's comments relatively short. I just want to say that do what you have to do to the use of force policy so that the next time Officer Cervantes does something stupid, like leaving the cover of his vehicle and running towards an unarmed woman, grabbing her and
Ms.
throwing her
Strong,
to the ground,
if you
the
could
use of...
refrain your comments from a particular person, if you could talk about the incident and not so much the people, that would be best served here so that we don't have to mute microphones. Thank you. Go right ahead.
Okay, so the next time an officer runs towards an unarmed woman, grabs her and throws her to the ground, the use of force policy finds that wrong. I want you to do what you have to do so that the next time an officer straddles an unarmed woman, punches her in the head, and knees her in the ribs while she is pinned down by 4 big and heavy men, the use of policy finds that wrong. I want you to do what you have to do so that the next time an officer runs around and engages in a tussle with an unarmed resident with the safety mechanism of his rifle set to fire, putting his life, his colleague's life, the public's life, the suspect's life in danger, the use of force policy finds that wrong. Even up to today, none of these people have been found accountable. I want you to do what you have to do so that the next time the police approach an unarmed juvenile whose description does not even fit what was reported, for example, during the earlier Lewis incident, and forces that juvenile to the ground, handcuffs him and intimidates him, the use of policy finds that wrong. I want you to do what you have to do so that when UPD officers act the way they did or in any questionable way, the use of force policy recommends that these officers be immediately put on administrative leave until a proper investigation is done. I want you to do what you have to do so that the next time Chief Serafin and Lieutenant Norton don't have to hold a session to tear down the reputation of an innocent woman just to justify
Ms.
actions
Strong, that'll be the
based
final
on the
warning for
current
direct game usage.
use
Jason,
of
if we can mute her mic and go ahead and have her finish her comments on email, please. Thank you. We want to thank Ms. Strong for participating tonight. I'd like to thank her for initially making adjustments on her commentary. Please, panelists, let's be mindful that this conversation, while burdened and laden with emotion, is for you all to share with us thoughts, feelings, suggestions on the use of force policy. We have asked our panelists to be here to participate, not to be target practiced or dartboards, but to be in a mode where they can hear and receive information. I want to once again thank Mayor Marlin and Chief Serafin, Norton Cassidy, all who are here tonight, Searle, Sanders, everyone who are here, who are working feverishly to take notes along with the scribe. So we will continue on this evening, and we want to thank everyone for waiting patiently who has their hand up. Jason, if you want to bring the next panelist on, please.
Yeah, Aaron Umberger will be joining us. And Aaron, you can turn your camera on if you wish and unmute your microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, good evening, Aaron. Go right ahead. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. My name is Aaron Umberger. I live in Champaign. I'm really just here to listen, but it was a little bit cumbersome trying to find the link and the information to join this listening session. I would just appreciate it, I think, if you would post it on Facebook. And I might be mistaken, I might be missing something, but I wasn't able to find it very easily. I just think that if we're going to try to keep this open and to as many people as possible, it'd be great to post it, to as many places as possible as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining and sharing with us tonight. Jason, we're ready for the next participant, excuse me.
Yeah, I'm promoting Carol now to a panelist. Carol, you can turn on your camera if you wish and unmute and begin talking.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, Carol. Welcome.
Thank you. I wasn't sure how this was going, whether we're just going to have little things, but I did jot down some things that I thought were important. And I'm coming at this from, as some of you know, because I have contributed to the 27,000 cases. I'm a foster parent, And in the last decade, I've done a lot of teens that may have been on their way to residential, may have just stepped down, in and out of psychiatric hospitals. And I'm single, so if I'm the target when they're having a crisis, I've had lots of help. I also am a substitute teacher in Urbana and at the Cunningham Gerber School. So I'm coming at this from my experience there. And I guess one real quick thing is all subjects, it shouldn't be considered innocent until proven guilty. They're innocent unless proven guilty. And if we all kept that in the back of our mind, it would be easier. And nobody on the scene has the whole story. We're not the judge and jury out there. So we should always remember that they're innocent unless proven guilty. Another comment, I've over the years, but never got anybody to do it. I have not asked the current chief. I have talked to other chiefs and different people at school. And this is on the one of the shared principles of community policing and connecting. And as a foster parent, I've had lots of kids that were very scared of police, anti-police when they came. And I've had lots of them after the interaction, especially one that was here for almost 3 years, was totally different, his thought of police. So we can change it, but I thought we should, in the SPLASH program, we can't do it right now at UMS, should have a kids and cop creating community where the police officers in small groups are, so they get to know the kids and the kids get to know them. And that would go a long ways, I think, but it was always a problem of staffing before that it never happened. I like the one door idea for helping people with mental illness, but the police officers still need the training that they have now, and you never can have too much because you don't know which call where somebody's going to have a mental health incident. And I have had lots of those calls over the last 15 years, and they've all been very positive. That doesn't mean there isn't other cases, and I know in other communities, and the April 10th incident obviously didn't go well. On restraints, and this is also related to the April 10th, and I think it should be in the policy too, just like at school, you don't do a restraint by one person unless it's a small child, and even then you have somebody else there. And every time people have come to help me, there's multiple people there, and that was part of the problem on April 10th, was an officer going over there by himself instead of waiting. That could have been prevented if everybody knew you don't, and that would decrease the need for batons and struggles and fights, because you got the manpower, people power to not do it. I mean, at school we would never use force against a student, you know, like you hitting them to, if you needed to restrain them. And part of that is you have enough people. And I guess the other on the shared principle number 2, the dignity and respect. And this is something that teachers struggle with too. And the April 10th incident is an example that's totally different than all the experience that I had. But you shouldn't be yelling at people. I mean, first of all, it's not the respectful, and you're losing control. But it also, talk about de-escalation, you're escalating the situation. I mean, nobody wants yelled at to start with. And a lot of people have had these adverse child events, and that just, the people with trauma, and we teach with trauma in mind. And I think there needs to be more of that so that the officers know where you're coming from, but you're sending that kid back to a helpless, or that adult, whatever, back to a helpless, hopeless situation if they've been traumatized before. And the other thing on not escalating it, that's real easy to do when you want somebody to do something, is you keep telling them and keep talking. And what you really need when somebody's in a crisis is to give them time and not just keep saying either the same thing or something else over. In part just because they've got to get themselves in the position to do what you need. But also, some people just process things. And as a teacher, you got to realize this. You could be on your third question of quizzing the students, and some student just got the answer to the first one because they processed it different, or a different speed. Thank you.
Carol, thank you so much. And certainly on behalf of tonight's panelists and the city of Urbana, we want to thank you for your service to our youth and to our community. And thank you so much for your participation and input. Jason, we are ready for the next attendee.
Yeah, that's going to be Sarah Nixon. Sarah Nixon will be joining as a panelist. And Sarah, you can turn on your camera should you wish and unmute your microphone and begin speaking.
Were you addressing me, Sarah Nixon, Jason?
Yes, good evening, Sarah. We can hear you.
Okay.
Go right ahead. Good evening and thank you.
So Jason, I didn't hear what you said. So you know, what you did was you cut me out of the meeting and then I saw something saying rejoining the meeting. So I'm just guessing. I'm speculating that you were addressing me, but it seems that that is correct. I'm going to assume it is.
Yes, ma'am. We're here live. Go right ahead. He had to make you a panelist so that you could appear here and we could be able to hear you. If we can
Right.
hear you,
Just
and we
so
thank
you
you for
know,
joining.
during that process, the sound goes out, so I can't hear what you guys are saying. Okay, so I don't have a formal comment composed, so bear with me if I work from shorthand notes here. But first of all, I've been listening to the input from the public, and one thing that strikes me is that this event is being promoted as a session at which the panelists are here to listen to thoughts, feelings, and suggestions on the use of force policy. And I noted that that was exactly what one speaker, Ms. Tracy Chong, was in the process of doing when she was silenced. And I find that puzzling and deeply disturbing to have witnessed that, a sincere attempt from a member of the community to address and provide exactly what was requested. So a listening session that does not value and respect the act of listening and the First Amendment is not in fact a listening session. It's a silencing session. Another thing of note is that the discourse surrounding this session is heavily emphasizing police officer trauma. And this is inappropriate. As a trauma-informed community wellness advocate, I think the issue of police trauma is important. I truly do. But this is not the time, place to be privileging and prioritizing and emphasizing law enforcement PTSD. This community is a community that is aching and reeling and traumatized by the abuse that we have witnessed that has been and continues to be leveled at Miss Alea Lewis. This community is not a group of people focused on the concerns of police PTSD, as important as that issue is. And you're speaking about the issue as two sides, as if they were equal, two sides of a coin, is just wrong. Citizens are not showing up at police officers' houses with weapons and using them. Urbana citizens are not accosting police officers in the street and brutally attacking them. The impact is completely different. There's a big difference between the context of officer trauma and victim trauma, right? For one thing, so-called perpetrator trauma, one difference is that the vast majority, right, close to 100% of quote unquote perpetrators and police brutality and misconduct victims, in other words, people who become criminal justice system involved, have, again, close to 100% of them have a background of pre-existing significant and very high adverse childhood experiences scores. In other words, pre-existing trauma and trauma conditions. Now, police officers, on the other hand, overwhelmingly do not come into their profession with high childhood trauma levels, right? They do not come in with high ACEs scores, because for one thing, those who have high scores would struggle, tend to struggle at all levels of education and professional pursuits. So I think it is, you're doing an injustice to the community when you keep harping on or emphasizing that, you know, we need to consider both sides as if they were equal things. They simply are not. And what we are asking for is trauma-informed policing, domestic violence-informed policing, racial bias-informed policing, and of course, mental health-informed policing. And the whole purpose, the whole reason we are all here today is because of Alea Lewis, and whose name we are not hearing uttered by those of you in a position to make a difference when it comes to policy, when it comes to listening, when it comes to engaging community. And I know I speak for a great number of Urbana residents when I say that these responses are weak and they are completely unacceptable. We want to hear you say her name, and we demand and want you to demand that the wrongful charges against Ms. Lewis be dropped. Now, I viewed the 10 Shared Principles launch workshop. Again, I was greatly saddened to see that not once was Alea Lewis mentioned. Not once was Alea Lewis acknowledged. The Urbana Police Department and the city of Urbana have buried Alea Lewis under a pile of lies and false charges and have left her in the dust, forsaken, tossed into the Illinois criminal justice and incarcerative machines. When I review the 10 shared principles, which I don't know how much time I have left in my comment right now. It's hard to do this, by the way, without having a clock, a speaker's clock, to assess time left.
Well, not to cut you off, the speaker's clock was up on the screen. The 5 minutes has expired, but you do have the opportunity to come back and speak again. We're just going to try to keep everyone at an initial 5 minutes so that we give everyone at least one opportunity to address the panels tonight. So we do want to thank Ms. Nixon for joining us and sharing those heartfelt comments. And Jason, we are ready for the next participant.
Yeah, and L'Oreal has been promoted to a panelist. You can turn on your video should you wish and unmute your microphone.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Good evening. And is it L'Oreal? Am I saying that correct?
Yes, L'Oreal Allen.
Okay, good on. We'll go right ahead, Miss Allen. So glad to have you with us.
Okay, I'm from Champaign, and personally, Mr. Peppers, I don't think that you had the right to interrupt Miss Chong when she had the right to use examples when she was talking. That's not okay. Anyway, I think that using force isn't okay to a certain degree. When I say this, I mean someone is if they're actually causing danger, and you know for sure that the person is actually causing extreme danger, then maybe restrain them. But all the physical contact isn't needed. You don't need to punch someone to get their attention. You don't need to put your knee in someone's neck to make sure they're not doing anything harmful to themselves or others. Use other mechanisms to help that person. For example, maybe instead of yelling, politely talk. There's no need to yell. Just imagine if it was flipped and you were the one getting yelled at. You wouldn't like that, now would you? No. The saying that is still being said to this day by you grown-ups to kids, but y'all can't seem to listen to your own words, treat others the way you want to be treated. I bet you said that to others at least once, but you can't seem to do so. Let's think about that for a second, because you want kids to treat people with kindness, but y'all can't seem to keep your hands to yourself, or you can't seem to keep your harsh words to yourself. Again, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything. Wow, so many life lessons, huh? That y'all can't even apply to life. This is sad that you can't do your own job correctly, and you're literally taking advantage of your job, and it's not okay. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us and sharing your heartfelt comments tonight, Ms. L'Oreal Allen. Jason, we are ready for the next participant.
Yeah, I am promoting Alan Max Axelrod to a panelist. Alan, you can, you've already turned on your video unmuted. You're ahead of me. There you go. Go right ahead.
Yeah, repetitive instructions, been able to follow the pattern. So I wanted to basically say why I, as an observer, remain unconvinced about the integrity of this process, and that is not to disparage the people participating who may mean well. It is to say that the setup of it is full of things that breed distrust through ambiguity and through contradiction. Let me enumerate a few. Domestic violence is one of the police calls that y'all respond to quite often. That's been on the rise, especially during the pandemic, but it's usually tied to extenuating circumstances that are taxing on one's mental health, such as poverty. And I would like to see from this police department an increased expenditure out of their budget, specifically to facilitate rapid rehousing in our community. Only Rockford, Illinois, in the entire state, has rapid rehousing, and they are the only city in the entire state to be credited with ending chronic homelessness, both for veterans and everybody else, according to the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. The other thing that I wanted to bring up when we're talking about this is there is the discussion around de-escalation. During the original post-mortem, as it were, explanation of the events around April 10th and Aaliyah Lewis, one of the things that Police Chief Serafin had said was that de-escalation was not the top priority when there was a gun believed to be present. And I would actually strongly disagree that if there's a weapon present, there is an increased impetus for de-escalation. And under no circumstances should that ever be made secondary. And there's been no addressing of that, despite the fact that the Hillard-Hines report noted that de-escalation should be a higher priority, if not a top priority. The other thing is that it is incredibly upsetting and breeding of distrust yet again when a police department is able to charge somebody with a crime related to the assault of an officer after that officer punched first. It's a really simple idea that I'm suggesting here. It's that you don't charge people with crimes if the officer struck first and someone was defending themselves. If y'all can't de-escalate and avoid hitting somebody first, you're not doing a job that serves the community. You're bullies. And I also want to emphasize that I think you should give Tracy Chung her time back. A listening session where you only listen to things that you want to hear is not a listening session. And one of the facets of trauma that is very important and again remains unconvincingly espoused by this department that you all are trauma informed is that a lot of the behaviors of folks who have been traumatized by an oppressive system do not tend to express their trauma politely. So I would urge that any sincere effort clear up these ambiguities and also allow for rudeness, because quite frankly, the things that cause that rudeness to emanate are much more severe than what's expressed. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alan. And Jason, do we have any other participants who have not spoken at all yet? Are we ready for a second round at this time?
I suppose we're ready for a second round. There's no hands up of people who haven't spoken yet.
Okay. Before we start our second round, it looks like I do see a new hand. Do I see a new hand there?
Yes, you are correct. Jane has just raised.
Okay.
So let me promote Jane here.
Thank you so much.
Jan, rather. Sorry, Jan. So Jan, you should be a panelist now, and you can turn on your camera if you wish.
I did prepare a statement to read tonight. I think it'll fit in your time frame, and it's kind of in a different line of thought than what we've been hearing. So if I can pull it up here. First of all, I want to say that I'm a long-term resident of Urbana. I'm a white woman, so I know I speak from the perspective of privilege, but I have many friends and acquaintances who have shared their stories and experiences with me and have really helped me broaden and think differently about the impact of interactions with police officers in the parts of our community where people of color are involved in those interactions. So I want to start by saying that I have read the 10 shared principles that was created by the Illinois NAACP and Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police. This document has a lot to say about use of force policies. And one of the first things it says, or that for me, that it addresses is this business of trust. So I would like to suggest that creating trust really needs to begin before use of force is necessary. Trust is based on building genuine relationships, not on relying on power or force. All members of the community need to believe that police are more than just law enforcers exhibiting their power. Indeed, that they are actually among the guardians of our community's welfare, as are health care people and educators, for example. And to be honest, I really think police officers probably need to believe that the whole community trusts them to do the best thing when there is danger at hand. We have to have community welfare as our common goal. But in the midst of living towards this end, we can build better connections of trust. Included in trust building is learning to value and respect the other. We know this. We're grown-ups, we know this, but we often forget or ignore it in times of danger or fear. And that goes on both sides. The police, I think, enter situations, whether you want to admit it or not, you're fearful. And people encountering police in certain situations are fearful. And when we're fearful, we're not thinking rationally. So that's being human. The first of the 10 shared principles states that every human life is valued. In fact, it is of the highest value, the highest priority. In the context of this evening's conversation, I think that means that the ones who ask for the police presence to come, the police officers themselves, suspects, victims, bystanders, witnesses, everybody that's involved in that moment are of equal value because they're human beings first. Holding a weapon may make a person more powerful in that minute, but not more valuable. So we need to consider, what do our actions in those moments of encounters say that we really, really value. Maybe we shouldn't approach the situation with the gun drawn. The second principle calls for dignity and respect to be shown to each person. Again, that includes every person involved in an encounter with police officers. The accused, the accuser, the victim, the officer, the suspect, witness, bystander, etc. I think we show respect with our words, tone of voice, body language, honesty, consistency, and humanity.
Ms. Jan, sorry to cut you off. We have reached the 5-minute limit, but please, we welcome you to raise your hand again and get back in the circulation of our participants. We do want to try to give everyone at least one chance to participate and speak on this evening. Having said that, Jason, you want to go ahead and send up the next first-time participant, please?
Yeah, I've just promoted AJ to be a participant.
Thank you. Good evening, AJ. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thank you so much for participating this evening. Go right ahead with your comments.
Okay, thank you. This is, everyone's already touched base on the policy, but I just wanted to add like a really quick comment, kind of make a quick point. It's nice to have these policies. It's nice to have everything that is on paper and makes everyone go, ooh, look, they're trying. Like that's great. But is accountability going to actually be met? And we've seen this in Champaign County to where, just for example, a gun discharges and ends up killing a teenager, and the cop has absolutely no accountability. The city pays the person out, and then they say, oh, we're not at fault. That's complete nonsense. If you want citizens to be held accountable and stand up and be like, hey, I did something wrong, then someone within the system needs to be admitting accountability. I also find it a serious conflict of interest when you have a state's attorney that has a cop as a husband. The husband loses his weapon and absolutely nothing happens to him. There's incident after incident that has happened that has, I mean, how do you expect anyone to trust when the system lets these cops get away? They still get their pension, they still get all this money, and then you've ruined someone's life in the process or taken their life in the process. It makes absolutely no sense. It's ludicrous and it's wrong. And it's clearly covering cops' tracks. It's been proven time and time again. I don't care what the investigation said. Like it seems pretty clear that the system just protects police officers. And I also wanted to make the point too that if that gun that was that the cop was using again, or that the cop had, was just swinging everywhere when he was on Aaliyah Lewis, like what would happen if that got discharged? Probably nothing. That cop probably would have still got his pension and all that, because I mean, there's no accountability. Absolutely none. But yeah, that's the only comment I wanted to say. Thank you.
AJ, thank you so much for participating this evening. We appreciate your commentary. At this time, I don't see any new participants. Before we start second round, I would like to open it up just for a few minutes to any of our panelists who would like to share, comment, respond, or just give input, maybe on what you've heard this evening, or fresh input as far as your thoughts and feelings on use of force moving forward. If that's okay, I would, maybe take 5 or 10 minutes just to allow any of you all who might like to share at this time before we go into round 2 of our public input. Anyone want to share with us this evening off the panel?
I can share for a bit. Again, I want to make sure that this is about the citizens tonight, and it's not necessarily about us. I did want to point out a couple of things that I'd noted throughout. Some of the things are very, very specific that have been brought up, or about a specific incident. And while I recognize those as motivations toward change, I kind of want to talk about a couple of things that were brought up that were more broad in scope. First of all, the de-escalation absolutely needs to be in the use of force policy. There's no question about that. I've already said that before, and while we practice it, we did not do a good job of having it in that particular policy. So that's going to be part of this particular process. Exactly as to how that ultimately works out and pyramids and things, I don't know just yet. But that is that will be in the policy moving forward. In addition, I have received a draft with regards to citizen training so that we can have a civilian on the use of force review committee. So that effort is underway, and that will be accomplished. Right now, I do have, like I said, at least an initial draft of what does that training sort of look like to sort of get that person up to speed. With regards to some of the internal auditing right now, and I don't know if one of the patrol lieutenants might be able to speak to this, we do have a process in place where the officers, where supervisors review video, and there's some parameters on that so that supervisors can hopefully catch something major or see a pattern that needs to perhaps be tweaked or assist an officer or maybe recognize a training insufficiency. So I don't know if either Joel or Jason, if you guys would be able to know exactly sort of what that schedule might be, that might help a little bit to know that we are trying to monitor the officers. This is with supervisors can't be everywhere, but indeed with the body cams on, that does give us much more a greater ability to oversee.
So yeah, previously when there was use of force, it was just reviewed or sent to the review by the investigations divisions. Now that we've started reviewing body cam footage, the sergeant at the end of the night or beginning of the morning has to review the footage, and there's several more checks and that the incident has to go through to make sure that it's either viewed by a supervisor or the committee in a more rapid manner than it was previously. So we're trying to advance the process, given the addition of body cameras.
Joel, and I don't know if you know, Joel, perhaps maybe, so just if you will, the monthly spot checks, even if you could speak to that a little bit here, that would be helpful.
Sure. So the sergeants are required to, on a regular basis, review videos from different classifications of each of their officers. So sergeants assigned 3 officers per shift that they're responsible for, and they're constantly reviewing those videos, whether it's traffic stop, whether it's squad car or body worn camera. But they're not just looking at what was the officer doing, but how was the officer performing? What training do we need to get from the officers? How do we need to better train the officers and find ways to identify enhancements through just watching how officers do things?
And I guess I'll just add one of the other things that had come up, and I think it was Deborah Liu who had mentioned that a weapon point is indeed a weapon point is indeed a use of force, which is tracked by the agency and is accounted for. So I agree with you, and that stat's been being collected for 10+ years. So thank you for bringing that up. So I guess, Lamont, maybe we're ready to go back at this, or something you wanted to specifically.
No. I just wanted, we had made to the first round. So sure. It looks as though we are set now to begin kind of round 2 and beyond. We have several hands up. If I'm looking at it correctly, I believe all of them we have heard from, at least initially. So Jason, if you want to go ahead and begin to let our participants back in for a second wave of commentary and sharing.
And Christopher's back with us now.
Okay. Mr. Hansen, are you there, sir?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, Ken. Go right ahead, Mr. Hansen. Thank you.
Hold on, just flip my screen off. Okay. All right, here. My name is Christopher Hansen, back again. I was content just listening for the rest of the session, but having seen someone get cut off entirely, I felt like I wanted to give some more input. I first wanted to point out, again, on process here, this event really was not arranged very well. And I'll just point out one thing. It says on the website for listening sessions, video will remain off for all members of the public when speaking. I guess if we were planning on using video, it would have been nice if you informed the public. I happen to be using a device where I think the camera doesn't work properly. So otherwise, I'd be happy to be using video right now. On the use of force issues that Seraphin just mentioned, I don't think anyone's going to be content just putting one civilian person on the board, not knowing who that person is or where their loyalties lie. Let's just open that up entirely. Why don't we actually have every use of force report or review or whatever you call it fully available to the public, so the public can see each one. If you have sessions or meetings discussing uses of force, why don't we open those up to the public to whatever extent possible? That would be useful. Why don't you give us some numbers? How often does use of force review actually find misconduct? Does it ever find misconduct? What do you do when you find it? And how can citizens know about that? It'd be nice to know when the times that you do find misconduct. I'd like to be able to review those incidents so I know what's happening in my city and my police force. In regards to the speech restrictions that you're placing upon people right now, I see in the meeting here we've got Cassidy, Seraphin, Norton, Sanders, and Searles. I'm pretty sure all these guys have been in difficult situations. I'm sure they've been called much worse things than any words that anyone would ever utter in this meeting. I'm sure they've been physically accosted and many times as police officers. I'm pretty sure they can handle some free speech at this meeting. Mr. Peppers, I think by placing these kind of school children rules upon people, you're kind of just embarrassing the officers that are here, and you're also seriously depleting the value of the meeting. I mean, now, unfortunately, when Chief Seraphin and Mayor Marlin go back to, say, the city council or whatever meetings are to come after this, they're not going to be able to claim that they heard everything from the public. They're going to have to say, yeah, we heard some comments, other ones we cut off because we didn't like what they were saying. And so that damage is done now. And so I'm not sure what was gained there. It seems like a lousy gambit. As it happens, Ms. Trong I think she was describing the arrest of Olea Lewis and Eric's rough rifle being dangerous. And I happen to be the one who authored that article on that issue. And I think it's correct and it was dangerous. And back to the accountability issue, Seraphin refuses to comment on it directly. The Hillard Heinz review didn't comment on it directly. And this kind of, I think I asked a lot of questions about accountability the first time I spoke. And it seems to me those questions have now been answered. When there is a violation of policy, what you're going to do is you're going to refuse to comment on it. If someone from the public tries to bring it up, you're going to muzzle them and mute them, and you're not going to let them speak. So you've kind of answered that question now, and your answer is really unfortunate. So, and it was a policy violation, by the way. You do have a section in your policy about the officer being responsible for retention of their firearm. That was clearly violated. Guys, all of the top cops sitting there, it's not that hard to admit when you're wrong, okay? I mean, just if your goal here is some kind of community trust, then start admitting when you're wrong. It's really not that hard. Someone else spoke about trust. I think some of the officers sitting here probably know my name, and you probably, at least at some point, knew me as someone who was very actively trying to reduce crime in my area. And I don't trust you guys anymore. I don't want to work with you. You know, I've been harassed a number of times by Urbana police officers. I see crime in the neighborhood now. I don't want to call it in. I don't want to send you the video. When you guys knock on my door asking for security camera footage, I don't answer it. I don't want to talk to you. That's where we're at. So I don't get it. I'm looking at the job description here for the community engagement coordinator, and I don't see that this is being followed right now in this meeting by Mr. Peppers. I mean, it says you're supposed to be promoting a long-term positive community relationships. And it's right in the top line of your duties here, and you're cutting people off instead. So Here's what I suggest, Mr. Peppers. Apologize right now and invite Ms. Chong back to finish her comments in a way where you're not going to mute her. And maybe we can try to start this process over. Otherwise, you just look like someone who's doing the opposite of your job description. So, thanks.
Thank you so much for your commentary, Mr. Hansen. And Jason, you want to go ahead and let the next participant in for round two?
Yeah, I've just promoted Sarah Nixon to a panelist.
Sarah, are you there?
Hi, yes, I would like to add to my previous comment and elaborate. So one thought that I wanted to articulate is that tonight's forum is one that you have billed and promoted as a community listening session, as you did the one held this afternoon. And yet, what really stands out is that the listening session, begins with the facilitator prefacing the session with what amounts to an intimidatory and chilling admonishment delivered in a heavy-handed manner. And what that does is it effectively introduces barriers before anyone has, especially children and youth, have mustered up the courage to speak to a panel of uniformed officers, adults, and authority figures, and for many, as other commentators said, people whom they perceive as bullies and as dangerous. I don't think the introductory commentary was terribly helpful in terms of creating a climate, a feeling of this is a dialogue. We genuinely want to hear from you, the community. So maybe think about that moving forward. Because what we really got today was a group of children or youth that apparently wanted to be heard and yet were too intimidated to make a peep. And this left us with the clear impression that that's how Urbana wants its residents and its youth, its community to be, silent. And so you can't pat yourselves on the back and say that you held a listening session when you're not listening, and when you're dictating the content of what the public can say, and when you're silencing people. You already know that community trust in the Urbana Police Department is gone, and weak gestures aren't sufficient. So again, among the major concerns that the community has in large numbers with regard to the use of force policy are issues that include, as others have mentioned, Urbana police attacking an innocent and unarmed resident while recklessly ignoring what appeared to be some sort of military rifle, and apparently which was set to fire. And we still haven't had any kind of adequate and responsibility-taking response from leadership, from anybody involved with regard to that in and of itself. People are concerned that command staff at the Urbana Police Department have held a session to tear down the reputation of Miss Lewis, who we all know is and was an innocent woman, and this was done to justify the officer's actions based on the current use of force policy, rather than take responsibility and accountability for violations of her rights and of what any reasonable use of force policy ought to be. These concerns also include that leadership decided to pay a biased firm $20,000 of residents' money to conduct an investigation that simply said officers acted according to policy because the policy is inherently dangerous and defective. Residents are also concerned that Miss Aaliyah Lewis, a very young woman, has her life now ruined by a slew of felony charges, again, because UPD officers made terrible decisions, made terrible mistakes. And yet this was simply covered up as we pointed to them acting according to policy. As well, people are extremely concerned that, as others have mentioned, the Use of Force Review Board is not diverse and consisting of 5 Urbana Police Department officers, all white men. That's not diversity, right? And that does not align with the 10 shared principles that the city and the department have adopted. So if you're going to hold listening sessions, pay for updated policies, hold PR sessions, but all of the incidents and all of the issues that people are, clamoring about are still happening and still being unaddressed, then the people feel that this is a show, a performance, and that it is a pointless one. And I'd like to just conclude by letting you know that what I have just shared with you is the remainder of Ms. Tracy Chong's statement that you so rudely and unjustifiably cut off and silenced. I wanted to make sure that her comments did get on the record. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nixon. And who do we have next, Jason? Excuse me.
I've just promoted Deborah back to be a panelist.
Hi, Deborah, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I just wanted to say for the record, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's a technical issue, but whenever someone is promoted to panelist, you are temporarily disconnected from the session, which is why I think people are confused when they're being promoted. Maybe something to look into. Hi, I'm back. Okay, so I have a bunch of other comments. So as far as the specific statement, the text of the use of force policy, I think it needs to be explicitly stated. The officer should use the minimum amount of force required to subdue an individual. I think we take that from, maybe it's part of administrative policy, but it does need to be explicitly stated because, these are dangerous adrenaline-laced situations. And I think it would be all too easy for an officer to go overboard.
Could you say that for me one more time? I'm sorry, we could hear you.
Yeah.
It's hard to understand. I'm sorry.
Sorry, am I talking? It needs to be explicitly stated that the officer should be using the minimum amount of force required for the situation. I think the policy also needs to include consequences for when the policy is violated, whether that's stated explicitly in administrative policy that the public should be able to see, or in the policy itself. It does need to say what happens when the policy is not followed. Otherwise, this policy has no teeth. It's basically useless, and there's no level of accountability to the public for an officer held with this policy. Also, a very specific comment on page 3, the policy reads, quote, "In the instance when force is used, officers should not intentionally use any technique that restricts blood flow to the head, restricts respiration, or which creates a reasonable likelihood that blood flow to the head or respiration would be restricted," end quote. I find that a deeply disturbing statement. There are no circumstances, granted I'm not a police officer, but as a human, I think there are no circumstances under which an officer should use any technique that restricts blood flow to the head intentionally or unintentionally. And I'll repeat my earlier statement about legal equivocation. I think the statement is full of words that let the department cover their ass in case anything happens, right? So, God forbid, we have another officer who finds themselves in another situation where they are apparently inadvertently murdering a member of the public. And you can just point to this policy and, hey, look, they didn't do it intentionally, right? And you can say, oh, the officer followed policy because they weren't intentionally choking this guy. Anyways, I find that specific statement very disturbing. I think it needs to be evaluated. And the entire statement is very boilerplate. I find it kind of insulting that the city of Urbana would just buy something, which obviously is lacking. Next thing I'd like to say, I'm not unsympathetic to the role of police. I recognize that officers are often sent into dangerous situations where they don't have the full story. They don't know if someone is armed, they don't know if someone is dangerous, and they're sent into the line of fire. This is why explicitly policy guidelines on the use of force are even more important. Officers are often sent into situations where it's dangerous, right? They're full of adrenaline. They fear for their own safety. They need to make decisions on the fly whether or not someone is a imminent threat to their own health or safety, or to the health and safety of the witnesses in surrounding them. And this is why the policy needs to be explicit. If you let a adrenaline-laced individual on site make a decision on the fly, it's a disservice to the officer on the scene. It's a disservice to the public, because every action they make in that moment is going to be dissected under a microscope, and they need to have an explicit policy to point to say, look, I acted explicitly according to the policy. If the policy is wishy-washy, if the policy is full of holes, people are obviously going to be angry, and the officer's actions won't be explicitly justified by the policy. This is why the policy needs to be it needs to be airtight, for your own protection as well as the protection of the citizens that you're called to serve. I'd also like to see from the police in this town, written policies are all well and good, but I think anyone who has worked in any sort of administrative context knows that people ignore policies. What they actually follow is they model the behavior of those above them, both their supervisors and those who are more senior and more experienced than they are. As far as interpreting this policy, right, when you hire a new officer, they're not going to go, oh, let me read the policy, cover to cover and dissect every possible meaning. No, what they're going to do is they're going to follow the actions of officers that are more experienced than them. They're going to follow the actions of their supervisors. So I'd like to know how the police plan on making themselves explicitly accountable to the community in this way. You can't just point to the policy, right? You have to say, look, this is what we're actually doing on the field when our boots are on the ground. This is what we do to adhere to policy. Right, last two comments. I've heard a lot about accountability and trust of the public in this meeting. Obviously, the police department and nationally, as well as in our local community, you've lost the trust of the public. And that's why accountability is so important. I think for this reason that the use of force, anytime use of force is documented, that information needs to be available freely to the public, not through a convoluted FOIA process that may or may not charge people. We obviously with private information redacted as necessary, but the police department needs to be ahead of itself, right, in making itself explicitly accountable to the community. You need to offer information before it's asked for or demanded to rebuild that trust. I'd also like to say on the City of Urbana website, right, there's an org chart, and all of you work for the people of Urbana, and obviously from the comments you've heard tonight, there are a lot of extremely hurt and traumatized people that are not content with the actions of the police. Yeah, that's yeah. And then one last thing, specifically to Chief Serafin, I'd like to ask a question. You say that the pointing of weapons is documented. I'd like to know how this is documented and how the public could access the database. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Liu. And Jason, if you want to go ahead and bring forward our next participant, please. Alan, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, go right ahead, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess the theme of the second round is basically that respect is earned. And so I want to talk to you about a couple different ways that you all can earn respect. I understand the 10 points is one of those gestures in that direction. And so what I would suggest, in line with a previous commenter, is not only to enshrine consequences for violating these 10 points, but to, at a minimum, voluntarily include those consequences as a rider in the FOP contract that is under negotiation. A rider is part of the contract that is basically separately negotiated as an item. So it's not necessarily the contract as a whole. I think that that is something you can do. And so I would, for one, be very appreciative if the police department voluntarily in the bargaining process included more accountability. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, again, FOP is a union. Unions are meant to, at least partially, protect workers from management. In this case, that dynamic might be to protect the rank and file officers from the police chief, etc. But I wanted to talk about how one management person outside of the bargaining unit is putting our community at risk, and that is our sheriff. Back in March or April, it's been a very long time, the sheriff had issued a statement saying that he would not enforce evictions. That has not been reissued since. And the governor, just today, had talked about how he hasn't made up his mind yet about eviction protections. And he'll make some decision at the beginning of next week. The problem is with the utility shutoffs, we're seeing how anything less than blanket protections has put us all at risk. The people that this office, this department is meant to protect and serve. So it would further engender some trust if the police department were to urge the sheriff to proactively address the potential resurgence of evictions, because we may well see a non-blanket ban of evictions, which will further dehouse people. We are the number 6 state in population. We are the number 1 state in terms of new coronavirus cases. By tomorrow, if we have more than 12,100 new cases, as we have had for almost every day this week, we will have had the highest spike in the US out of all the other states at any point in time in the pandemic. So I think that that is something that you can do to help engender trust. I further wanted to talk about how whenever anybody who operates in the public is asked to apologize, it is difficult. The governor has yet to be able to do that either when it comes to the fact that he came to Champaign in late October and lied and was fact-checked by the media and has still not addressed it, even going so far as to randomly spout during his press conference that he has nothing to hide in reference to some work we were doing to show some of his conflicts of interest. And so when it comes to you all admitting when you are wrong, I wanted to illustrate an example of someone who should, on paper, have a harder time admitting that he was wrong than all of you. Outside of Urbana, outside of Champaign, there is an activist with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That is a disorder that has a very short life expectancy, has a lot of very nuanced triggers. And this person had gotten into a multi-month-long conflict with other activists and has managed to, in less time since the assault on Lilia Lewis by this police department has occurred, publicly apologized for it and made no equivocation about their standing for their conduct. So if somebody with a severe disability can do that to engender trust in the activist community, what's that say about our police department if they've yet to? So I would very much appreciate it if you actually did, and you did so unequivocally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan. Okay, it looks like we have a new participant here. Jason, if you want to go ahead and let, looks like Dennis in. Hello, Dennis, are you there? If you
Sorry, I'm unmuted now. Thanks.
Oh, yeah. Good evening, Dennis, and thank you for joining us.
Right. All right. So, okay, my name's Dennis Roberts. I'm on the city council. I appreciate all the commentary that's coming in from the community. I think it's really important to have that dialogue. When we had originally a conversation and a presentation about policy offered by Michael David Schlosser from the Police Training Institute, he, and during his diagrams, displayed the use of force pyramid, which showed how through a series of advancing altercation in an interaction with the individuals, the police were being trained using a diagram to respond with different levels of force. So I think that it's important, and I did express this to Mr. Schlosser, that if we're going to be incorporating de-escalation techniques into police training, that he needed to provide a new diagram with perhaps 3 columns instead of 2, so that there would be an equal opportunity for the officers to see and incorporate into their thoughts steps which they could take in that would be alternate to the ones which led to a further interaction with the individual subject, which would lead then to force being applied more and more appropriately in terms of how it's being taught today. So I did come up with a alternative sketch, a rough idea of what that diagram could look like. And I did send it to Mr. Schlosser. And I know that I think that Brian Seraphin probably has seen this as well. But I'm going to be sending it to the participants of the panel today in the city and the police department so that they can, again, reconsider the steps which could be taken to create a de-escalation in any altercation with the public, and perhaps then use it as a training device. However, it may be modified or elaborated by the department itself, so that there can be a visible tool and a diagram that brings de-escalation into the police force and into the minds of the officers in a more direct manner. So I just want to offer that again. I think it's very important. I really appreciate the fact that the officers and the city is taking seriously the comments of the public. I think we realize that the Elia Lewis case has been a touchstone in the community. Many people have, expressed their horror at what they've seen. And yes, I do agree that there were missteps. There could have been maybe different steps that were taken. But this is pretty much the past, and we're trying to learn from it. So I think the most important thing to say is that from now on, we're going to do better. We expect more, and we are going to try to achieve true non-bias interactions with the public, which will give honor to all involved, the police force, and also the rights of the victims. So I just thought I'd say that, and I will be sending you, again, the copy of that diagram so that you can use it for future study. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dennis, and look forward to getting that email. At this time, we are about 20 minutes outside of the full 2-hour deadline. Do we have any other participants at this time who wish to log in and share? We do have one. Jason, looks like Carol has raised her hand again. Hi, Carol, are you there?
Yep, but I'm not sure what happened. My hand was up earlier. I don't know why it got lost.
Oh my goodness, well, go right ahead. Thank you for coming back with us.
Just to reiterate points that I think are important in the training, the trauma training, the de-escalation, and I didn't really talk about the implicit racial bias training, but that's so important. And all the training is ongoing, and you should be looking at what's happened to make the best better all the time too, just like we do at school. I do have a thing that just sort of ironic that the taser, to use it, you need the extra training of the CIT, which is and it's too bad that not everybody can do that, but 40 hours. I'm part of NAMI and helps with that. I don't personally help with it, but NAMI does. But it's sort of ironic. You need the extra training to use a taser, which usually isn't lethal, but the rest of the officers, everybody carries a gun, which is lethal. So it just is sort of interesting that the taser was restricted to those with the extra crisis intervention training. And that's just something to ponder. What else did I have on here? And I think it should be written in there about the restraints, unless you shouldn't be trying to do it with one-on-one unless there's some, very, very good reason. And somebody else mentioned the union, and it's a balance. It's the same thing with teachers, because there's false things, and in the situation, there's false accusations, and in the situation, you're making a decision based on that. So it needs to balance the protection of the teachers or the officers, but it is problematic when it's too strong. There was a case in Champaign just a few years ago with an officer that the chief tried to get rid of multiple times. The city paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars multiple times on incidences before they were finally able to remove a problematic officer. And we shouldn't have to go that far. And I guess the only other thing I jotted down here is I don't see your speaker role as restricting content of speech. It's almost shouldn't need to be said that we treat each other with respect. We teach and somebody said something about in school, we teach the children these rules. That's because that's how we show respect. We don't want people to forget them when they're adults. We get lots more done if we respect each other. But I don't see it as content suppression. And there's other ways if you don't want to give it orally. And I guess that's the comments that I had for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. We'll try to give a few minutes here to see if we have any other participants who would like to speak for the first time or are repeat participants. Once again, any of the attendees who are here who may have just joined, we are nearing the completion of our second listening session for our review of force policy with the Urbana Police Department. We had a session earlier this afternoon. There's this one tonight, and then there will be a last and final one surrounding the review use of force policy tomorrow from 3 to 5. We certainly appreciate all of the input that we have gotten this evening. We appreciate all of our panelists who have taken the time out of their evening to be here and to listen and to take copious notes and to be attentive to the concerns as they have been laid out and presented. Looks like we have a returning participant. Jason, if you want to go ahead, looks like Mr. Hansen has returned, and let Christopher in for us, please. Mr. Hansen, are you there, sir?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead. Thank you. Go right ahead.
Hey, thanks. I just wanted to review a few things that seemed like they haven't been answered, and I guess ask that they be answered. First, I asked about the use of force policies. In this session, it only reference to some 8-page preface was made, but there are many other policies. So I'm wondering, are there going to be additional listening sessions for those other policies? And then I had asked about the original policy set that have been largely replaced now. Chief Seraphin said that we would be able to see those, and I'm still not aware how we're going to be able to see those or when. I had asked about issues of FOIA in regards to the 10 shared principles, and I'm wondering if the police department is going to stand by all of the FOIA violations that have occurred recently in regards to police records requests. I also wondered if the police department is going to do anything about all of the Open Meetings Act violations we've been seeing in city council meetings. And I think that comes down to not just an instance of someone violating the law or violating criminal law, but also how the community sees us unequally applying the law. So, we look at, people brought up the Alea Lewis arrest, and we look at how rigorously the Urbana Police Department went after her. It turns out she hadn't done anything wrong at all. But then when we see, let's say, people committing Open Meetings Act violations very publicly, no one's going after them. That's an arrestable offense. I asked how we were going to actually ensure accountability, and I'm not sure that's been answered in any way. I asked for some numbers on how often does a use of force review actually find misconduct. I think that should be an easy one to answer right now, if anyone wants to. And let's see, I think that's pretty some of my list there. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to take up too much time. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hansen. We appreciate your commentary. Looking at the clock, we have about 15 minutes remaining. I don't see any hands up here currently. So if I may, I'd like to go ahead maybe and take the last 15 minutes or so and just open things up for anyone on our panel who may not have shared or may have already shared, or who has anything they'd like to share in light of some of the things we've heard, or maybe something we haven't heard. Once again, I, as a city employee, cannot express my gratitude to all of you enough for being willing to participate and to, no matter how it is received or perceived, throw your support to the community by asking them to participate in such sessions. So if any of our panelists have anything that they would like to say or share, certainly we would like to hear from you all at this time.
Okay, so I guess I can step up here, Lamont, for a couple of quick moments. An issue that has come up repeatedly that was fallout from the Elia Lewis event had to do with Officer Russell rifle safety, and I've heard it come up a couple different times. And I don't recall exactly, there was an email submitted, and maybe that was Mr. Hansen's sort of step-by-step photographic freeze frame. That matter was taken seriously. It was referred to his supervisor for an investigation. The safety was in the wrong position, and it was a violation of policy, and it has been addressed by his supervisor. So I just at least wanted to say that that was not exactly how it was supposed to go. So I thought that was important. I think Deborah Liu had asked again about how gun points are documented. The officer would author his narrative report, and in there the officers usually then will dictate or narrate, or I guess now everybody just types everything, but they will write in their report about what happened, and that is then flagged, and it goes into the annual use of force tally. I have never actually served on specifically as a member of our use of force review policy group here, or task group, but I know and so those are tallied then within the spreadsheet that oversees that particular document, and it also, or that particular task. And so those events, that's where we learn about different things. And I don't know if Lieutenant Norton has any further to add. I know that he oversaw this particular process in the past, but I do know that the gun points are tallied in that document. Jason, is there anything else that you want to add?
Oh, I think the Urbana Police Department was ahead of the curve. Circa 2005, we started that committee with some rough idea of which we should be looking for, and has advanced since then to different things that we should be documenting and reviewing. And yes, pistol points, rifle points, anything like that. The officers have to document that in the report. It gets checked on their routing sheets, and then it gets reviewed by the use of force committee, whether it was warranted or not. So yeah, that's been on there for at least 10 years, but possibly longer, along with many other things, OC, batons, any instrument that a police officer carried that they could use to be considered a use of force, to include open hands and strikes. Those things are all reviewed as uses of force. They're all put on the spreadsheet that the chief spoke about. Now with the addition of body cam, it makes that review process that more detailed and advanced.
Can you describe what OC stands for?
Oleoresin capsicum, pepper spray.
Going to give us just a couple more minutes here. If we don't have a hand raised, I would then ask if Mayor Marlin might give final commentary before I close us out here. We appreciate her being here. Her work is tireless. I don't know if many in the community know, I know this. Her days start very early. They oftentimes end very late, and certainly we owe you a debt of gratitude, Mayor Marlin, and we thank you for sharing, championing, and taking initial steps to heal old and new wounds. So at this time, we'll go ahead and have commentary from our own Mayor Diane Marlin.
Well, since I started at 7 this morning, I will keep it very short, but I just wanted to thank you all for attending. People who are concerned about other policies in addition to number 300 are welcome to comment on those. We'll take all comments and all input. And I just want to I appreciate you being here, and we will learn from this and we will do better.
Thank you so much to each of you, Chief Seraphin, Mayor Marlin, Searles, Cassidy, Sanders, Norton. I think all of us want to collectively give a special shout out and a tremendous thank you to Jason Liggett with UPTV and Lily Wilcock for scribing for us. Certainly thank you to you both for enhancing this process for our community, as well as for those of us who sit on the panel. And finally, before we go, as the City of Urbana's Community Engagement Coordinator, if we had any attendees who, for whatever reason, chose not to, did not feel comfortable speaking, I want to once again give out the use of force email and then follow that up actually with my own email if you feel comfortable enough and would like to contact me directly. I've been in this position a little over a month and have been fortunate enough to receive several emails. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lily. Yes, we have the use of force policy at urbanaillinois.us and then slpeppers at urbanaillinois.us. That is my personal email. I do respond to all emails. I return phone calls. Lily, if you want to go ahead and put my office number up, my direct office number is 217-384-2426. I feel honored and look forward to serving the City of Urbana in the greatest capacity possible. And at this time, we will go ahead and if I could have the screen split just to double check that we don't have any hands up. I don't see any hands up from the panelists. Those of you who are in attendance, I'll check one time. Do we have any final commentary submissions or any final participation from any of our community attendees at this time? I'll give a 60-second wait here to see if we have any hands go up.
Hey, Lamont, while we're waiting, is there a deadline for when we would like comments to be in?
That's a very good question.
The website lists November 20th.
November 20th, okay.
Thank you so much for that, Jason. So yeah, once again, if we've got comments that need to come into the use of force policy or to myself regarding tonight, we want to go ahead and have those in by November 20th. We do have 2 hands that have popped up. So Jason, if we could go ahead and give each speaker 3 minutes this time, and that will take us to our 2 full hour deadline. Looks like first up we have is AJ. Go right ahead, AJ, and thank you.
Yeah, it's just a super short comment that I meant to mention earlier. I'm not appreciative of the censorship either. I mean, freedom of speech, as long as it's not threatening, inciting fear, so on and so forth, check the Constitution. Saying someone's actions are stupid is not the same as calling that individual stupid or calling out their actions or conduct. That's not bullying. That's just pointing out things. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, AJ, and we appreciate your participation. And finally, our final panelist of the evenings will be Carol. Are you there, Carol?
Yes, and I just forgot one thing that I think just the same at school, if we end up having to restrain a student, it's sort of considered a lose-lose situation. And there's going to be times that people are going to resist arrest, but that's a lose-lose situation, and the goal should be never, even if you've got to wait them out, and we wait students out a long time. But there's too often in the paper you see the only charge against somebody is resisting arrest, and that's something we should try to minimize figure out how keep that from happening as much as possible, because it's a lose-lose situation when that happens. That was it. I just forgot that comment earlier. That was the only other one I had.
Thank you so much, Carol. Well, once again, thank you to the community of Urbana, the city and community, surrounding community of Urbana. Thank you to our attendees. Thank you to our panelists. And this will conclude the second of 3 listening sessions. The final listening session will be tomorrow, Friday, November the 13th from 3 to 5. If there's nothing further, thank you all so much, and everyone have a great night.